enjoying the festival so far? When do you watch the movies? Is it tomorrow? Yes. Tomorrow. First one's tonight. What are they watching tonight?
It's a special surprise.
It's a secret, and I'm leaving before then. I'm so bummed. It's Jesus Revolution. That's it.
We saw it last year.
That's awesome. That's right. I remember. You know what's funny? Yeah, I think I came earlier in the festival and did a breakout, and then John came later and did the screening of it. So I actually missed the screening of Jesus Revolution, which I wish I was able to be a part of. Well, this is like, I didn't have a good name for this, so I just kind of put the whole mantra on there, from beginning to end, essentially. I've been a part of, I'm going to grab a tea real quick because my throat's a little, I've been a part of a lot. It's actually one of my favorite things about the last 10 years of my life is that I've actually got to play in a lot of different sandboxes of the filmmaking process. So I guess if you guys don't know me, my name's Josh. Was a COO of Kingdom Story Company, which is John and Andy Erwin's company for the last 10 years. And then last year, if you were in my keynote yesterday, you would have heard this, but I'm going to reiterate. But yeah, I left there, felt like God's calling to leave and kind of pursue other artists and build a company on my own. And so that's been the last year of my life. I did independently produce Jesus Revolution with John and Andy. So that was kind of my last thing I did with them. But they're been such an amazing influence on my life. It gave me so many opportunities. A lot of the ones I'll talk about today and kind of the strategies I've learned came from that time with them. What's been fun about kind of my journey to this point has been I've got to be in a lot of different roles, and I'm really grateful for that because I learned a lot of the different aspects of the business. So I've spent some time in the marketing. I have friends here that have worked with me, Mark Harper and other people here at this festival that I've worked in the marketing side. I've worked on the development side, and I've worked on the production side. I've worked on the fundraising side. I've worked on the business management of how you even run a film business. There's not a lot of resources for these kinds of things out there, so I had to learn a lot of them kind of by doing, So my thought for this session is I'll talk to you about a couple projects that we've done in different kinds of ways, and then I would love to kind of open it up to be conversational because that's kind of how I feel like you learn is by talking through it, and I don't really know everyone's level of expertise. Last year, I think it was last year, when I came here, I was like, I'm going to teach them about this financial model, and I kind of felt like I went through it really quick, and I felt like maybe some of the room was a little like, all right, that was a lot, So this year I was like, I'm not going to be as present-y. I'm going to make it more conversational. That way I can meet people where they're at and kind of figure out what best you would like to learn from it. But again, I've been a part of some of the aspects I really enjoyed of the last 10 years was when I started with John and Andy, I started on their first feature film. They were doing music videos and promotional videos and documentary kind of content at that time. They were living in Birmingham, Alabama, and they were about to start their first feature film, which is a film called October Baby. It was I think maybe an $800,000 budget, which is pretty incredible when you look back on it now. So that was their first feature film, and what was cool about it is I was very young at the time, didn't really know anything about film or television, but I got to kind of go on that journey with them through the whole life cycle of that film, which was independently financed from just angel investors that believed in the cause of film and faith film and reaching the next generation with this kind of art. And then the thought was, like all indie filmmakers, I'm gonna make this movie, and then I'm gonna walk it into all these studios, and they're gonna write me these massive checks, and we're just gonna be filmmakers, and and it's gonna be great, and we're just gonna watch it, become very successful, and so on. It's not usually the way it goes. Once you finish the film, it's like half the battle is won, especially as an independent filmmaker. And I, throughout my career, have gone in and out of that, and I actually kind of enjoy that. I enjoy the process of going the indie route and then working with a studio. And so I feel very blessed that because of my kind of hitching my wagon with John and Andy, I got to live through that cycle in different seasons. So I've worked with studio financed films and marketed and released films, and I've worked on films that were hybrids where we privately raised the money and then released the film through a sub-distributor and I'll talk about that. And then, kind of managed that entire process, and then with John and Andy, built a company. So on October Baby, which was our first film, they raised the money to make the film, went around. The film, if you've not seen it, it's about a abortion survivor. It's a pretty pro-life themed kind of film, not a topic that Hollywood is super eager to jump in and green light. So I don't know why they thought a studio would pick that up immediately. Now I would look back and go I love the mission. It's gonna be a difficult movie to get out there. Even some successful films that touch on that genre in the last couple of years have had a very difficult time, even if the movie performed theatrically, just getting it out there, because it's just a polarizing message, and you're dealing with a lot of distributors and stuff that are not necessarily seeing your worldview or don't want to touch anything that's hot topic. So financed that film, went out there, got basically no's, and John, I believe it was through, I forget what was the trigger point that made him think about this, but somebody had communicated this idea that basically, hey, if you produce a movie and you can raise the money to market it, there are actually distributors out there that will do a services deal with you, essentially, which is they'll take your film and they'll charge a distribution fee to you, but for that, they will basically place it in, theatrically, in home entertainment, television, streaming, and that's it. So if it does well, you reap the profits and you just have to pay them a distribution fee. If it does poorly, they get distribution fee on whatever amount that the movie did. So it's kind of a win-win for them. Sometimes they'll make you put up kind of a minimum amount of money that at least covers a certain amount of their time that then is recoupable. So we did that on October Baby. We went with a company called Samuel Goldwyn. So you probably have seen Samuel Goldwyn, but most of the distributors have some form of that deal. It's out there a lot, which is a really great tool for independent filmmakers. If you have a film that is not gonna that you're not gonna sell, it's a great way to get it out there if you really believe in it. It's not like it's a guaranteed yes. Some distributors are a little bit more picky than others. But so that's what we did with that film. So we went with Samuel Goldwyn and then Provident Films, which had put out a lot of the Kendrick films. They had been a part of it. And we kind of worked with their marketing team and we put out October Baby, and it actually did fairly well. When I look back on the little experience we had at the time, we kind of didn't know what we didn't know. So it was actually fairly successful for what it was. We came out the weekend against the Hunger Games, which was a big movie. So we were counter-programming, which is a great strategy sometimes to be counter-programming. Funny enough, we all in this room would look at Jesus Revolution and be like, wow, that's a monster box office, right? But for Hollywood, they're like, oh, it's a great little counter-programming movie, 50 million and great, but for us, it's big, and that's so as a business strategy, sometimes you don't have, most of the time, none of us are gonna have the money that these big studios have to release movies. So you have to get really clever. So, when we were coming out, we were like, okay, I think at that time we had spent $800 making the film. We had maybe around 4. Mark, you would know, was it $4 million was our P&A on October Baby? And so we had to, that sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money in film terms. Film terms, these guys will drop $50 million marketing a film, and buy huge amounts of advertising and place it and just see if it works. You can't do that when you're an independent filmmaker. So we had struggled and worked very hard to even get 4. But the counter-programming idea, theatrically, which is neat, a lot of films won't want to come against what is going to be the successful kind of juggernaut film that year. So that the slate will clear, meaning that there'll be very, very little competition theatrically. So the idea is kind of going, hey, most moviegoers are going to go see Hunger Games, but our audience isn't necessarily the frequent moviegoer. There'll be plenty of inventory theatrically, and we can be a secondary option. And it worked. We were actually in the top 10 movies in America. We weren't huge box office, but because there was no other movies in America, we were top 10. Again, it's it gets you a narrative that works, so that kind of a thinking has stayed pretty consistent throughout my entire career working with the guys through all sorts of box office. Look for opportunities. Very few times have we been the big movie, coming out. When they did American Underdog, which is a football film, they were the big movie. It's a little scarier when you're the big movie kind of coming out. But yeah, even Jesus Revolution was considered counter-programming in between big titles coming out. So Cocaine Bear and Jesus Revolution came out on the same weekend. So we that was servicing both sides of the market, I guess. So that was, that still to this day, we kind of apply that thinking, looking for opportunities to find a niche to make a narrative that works and make a lot of noise in your counterprogramming. So that was that film. The very next film we produced was the studio picture. So we did it with Sony Affirm, which is a great distribution partner out there. They've been around probably the longest outside of Provident, championing faith film. So they financed the film and then paid for the theatrical release of it. So as it applies to, that is the sweet deal to have, right? You don't have to go out and raise money. You get to work with the studio. So we did that film, and it was really a learning moment for us. So we had to learn what it's like to work with a studio. It's different. There are pros and cons to going independent and raising your own money and releasing your own film and the control that comes with that. There's great things about that. There's also a lot of nerve-wracking things about that because you've raised money, you've looked those investors in the eyes, and you've, to the best of your knowledge, communicated clearly about the expectation of how this film could do. But it's a lot of responsibility, it's a lot of management, and it's a lot to it. Where when you're on a studio, it's all handled. Though you don't have as much control, comes with a ton of red tape, it comes with a lot of oversight, and it comes with a lot of just new kind of problems. So I am not sitting here saying I would prefer one model over the other. It's all about the season, it's all about the project, it's all about where you're at. So if you have an opportunity one day to have a deal with a major, it's great. The last 4 years of working with John and Andy, we had what they call a first look deal. So after I Can Only Imagine, which we did the same exact model as October Baby, we raised the money ourselves because nobody really believed the film was viable. It was a $8 million production budget. So we had kind of grown in our ability to make bigger films, but raised the money because not a lot of people believed in it. And then we took it out to try to shop it to studios. And amazingly enough, now when you look back, you're like, how could they not see that? It makes so much sense, but it's Monday morning quarterbacking. I had people tell me, I don't think that song is as relevant as you guys think. It's 20 years old. Are people caring about a song that's 20 years old? We're like, well, it's been the top 10 Christian song for 20 years. So, but you'd think it was a slam dunk, and it was not, because if it was a slam dunk, studios would have had it, and we went out to all the major studios with that film. At that point, and this is something I can talk to a little bit, we didn't really have great relationships at major studios. Like we go to Hollywood and try to get meetings, and we get meetings with the guy that was like 15 levels below the guy that would make the decision, and we'd be like super excited. We almost actually signed a deal on I Can Only Imagine with Relativity Media, and if you know anything about the history of Hollywood, that movie company went bankrupt and a lot of scandals, so we dodged a huge bullet there. But we did it. When we went out there to shop it, we finished the film, had our film print, we're super excited. Went out there, people really didn't get it. Hollywood and kind of the New York and Hollywood side of things do not understand the faith music, faith movie, faith audience, faith thing. And I don't think they ever will, and they're okay with that. Even the studios that are starting to go deep with faith products, they know there's a market there. That's just not their thing to go very niche and deep. So most of the time, they just want to find someone who that's their thing and throw money at that, or get in business with them and go deeper, because they just don't really have the time and it doesn't service their business well. So yeah, we went out there, it didn't work, no one bought it. So we ultimately went to and did a services deal with a company called Roadside, which Roadside Attractions is a great distributor. They've had some successful films that are really like kind of award season films. They have a good reputation in the business. Lionsgate actually owns 40% of them. So they're kind of the art house niche thing that Lionsgate likes to have. So they like to find indie cool films that they can say, hey, we're a part of that because of Roadside. We wouldn't put our main money into it or main focus on it, but because of Roadside, we can play in that arena. So we went to them, we did a services deal, raised all the P&A, and ran the whole marketing, like literally completely outside of Hollywood. Chris Fuhrer was our head of marketing. She marketed all the Kendrick films. So it was seriously, we had very little interaction with anybody who was an industry professional. And opening weekend, they thought the film was going to do 2 to 3 million. It ended up doing 17.5, and then ultimately went on to do 86 in theatrical and hundreds in home entertainment and all the things. It was a massive success. Because of that, the studio Lionsgate came to the Erwin Brothers and Kevin Downs and said, okay, this is interesting, which is just how Hollywood works. They look like backward a couple days. They don't really look forward. They're not anticipating. They just want to see what worked like. It's funny, even right now, I could have meetings in LA and talk to people about I Can Only Imagine. They're like, I Can Only Imagine, I've never heard of it. It's out of their, it's already gone, old hat. They don't, and right now, particularly, Hollywood doesn't think before the pandemic. It's like time is measured pre and post pandemic. Like if that worked pre-pandemic, don't know. But now, thanks to Jesus Revolution, which is like a blessing for everybody that's involved in this space, there is a post-pandemic metric to go, hey, the faith audience shows up to theatrical films. The faith audience watches this stuff like The Chosen. They go to theaters to watch it. And so that has been this huge shot of adrenaline for, I feel like, the faith content creators. And so I've told John, who directed it, I'm like, it's kind of like the faith Top Gun. It got everyone believing that, they can get back. And it's cool. And we're so thankful for that. And thank God. So I say that all just it's given me a lot of insight into those different approaches. And so I love talking, love teaching and getting into this stuff. I'm a super nerd of all this stuff. And I could talk for hours. I actually brought a resource that I want you guys to take all of them. 2 books that I brought with me that were meaningful for me and I still read and recommend to this day. There's a book called From Real to Deal, and I have like 10 copies back there. I call it my book ministry. I basically just give that book out to most filmmaker people that are starting, or even like professionals or investors that come to me and want to have a lot of questions. I'm like, just read this book, it will help, and it still helps me. From Real to Deal, and I have like 15 copies in the back. You guys can take them on your way out. And then the other book was written by an investor friend of mine who was kind of a mentor, and it's just on business and his philosophy, and it really impacted me. So I was like, if you guys are looking for a handout in the back, grab it on your way out. A lot of the where do I start and all the way through, it teaches in that book. So if everyone grabs them and there's none left, it's on Amazon. You can buy them for like $1, But it's a great resource that helped me in my career, so I wanted to have something to give you guys. But yeah. Again, I can go deep or shallow in anything, so I'll open up the questions. It seems that you have the first one, and we'll just have a conversation here. Let's do it.
I was very much interested in how the Jesus Revolution did their marketing.
Yeah.
IG.
Yep.
I love how they went live a couple of times and they interviewed like some of the actors
Yep.
and stuff like that. And I'm just kind of wondering the backstory, like how did it come about?
Yep.
It seems kind of rare, especially for the Christian film.
Yep.
To take that approach, which is great.
Yep. So I was listening to a podcast. I've just got into them. I know I'm like 10 years late to it. But there's a filmmaker, producer, kind of pioneer in film. His name's Jason Blum, and he started a company called Blumhouse, and he does not Christian films, but they're like kind of more on the horror genre, but they are very comparable from a business model standpoint to faith film. Typically, horror is low cost. It's niche. There's a niche of people that really love horror films, but the majority of people don't. But then there is a kind of a wider part of the onion, if you're looking at it from like layers of like when you get into like suspense, thrillers, and things that kind of goes wider. So I think there's a lot to be learned from the strategy of horror films. I don't really like them, but like from a business, social, marketing standpoint, they're worth looking at. And one of the first comeback movies of 2022, theatrically, was a Blumhouse movie named Megan that came back, and everyone was like surprised because in January this movie kind of blew up. It gave me a lot of faith for Jesus Revolution because I was like, okay, this is a niche content that's not a franchise film, that's not starring a massive actor, that's not based off a piece of IP that everybody knows, and it really kind of, to me, was a shot in the arm for the industry. But I remember him talking about marketing. And this is a very contested thing. I don't know what the divide here of creatives versus business versus marketing in the room is, but as a filmmaker, and as a producer, which I kind of view myself as, like, I would like to believe that the film has more to do with the success than the marketing. But the truth is, especially in the theatrical landscape, which is where I have the majority of my experience, the marketing has a lot to do with the success of a film. Jason Blum, who is also a producer, he said it, and I was like, man, if he says it, it's probably true. He said it's about 60% of the success of a project is the marketing. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't have anything to argue with other than like my experience. And my experience is that I think a really good film will go further, you know, and I think we'll see that. It'll be interesting to see. Right now you have Jesus Revolution and Cocaine Bear, where they're been compared consistently, which is hilarious. You know, so it will be interesting to see if, because I've been a part of these things where they smoke us in the beginning, but long term the movie actually ends up doing better. So that to me has to do with the movie and the audience and how they respond to it. So Jesus Revolution, there were some indicators. We did audience test screenings. It was scored very high, above industry norm. And then when people go to theaters and they leave, they get pulled as well, and they get this thing called a cinema score. It got an A+ cinema score, which is the highest you can get, meaning the audience really liked it. And that means it will do better longer. All that to say, marketing is very, very, very important to a theatrical release. I don't know how they market Netflix movies and streaming things, and there's probably someone better here to talk about that. My experience has been in theatrical. On Jesus Revolution, they employed a strategy, very well-run strategy by a woman named Tiffany Long, who was the head of marketing for it, has a company called Troops and Allies. They took an approach that, to be honest, I wasn't sure was the best approach. I was kind of skeptical, which was to over-screen the movie. And there is a debate, a hotly contested debate within the kind of the film marketing, film world, that a good movie can't be over-screened. And I've had so many investors come to me that have invested in our films going, man, they're just giving the movie away, you know, showing all these people. And the truth is, man, the data completely flips that narrative on itself. And Lionsgate got so deep into the data that they were able to even show that in the cities where we screen the film to wide audiences, because we screen the movie to like churches of like 3,000 people and everybody can watch it. In cities where we screened it like that, the theatrical market was better. And it wasn't just because it was like LA, New York, you know, in obvious places. It was in rural places as well, where we screened it and gave it away for free for people to watch. Theatrically, those numbers were higher in those areas. So we did that like crazy. I think we screened it for 50,000 people, you know, at the end of the day, which again, it was very hotly contested in our community. And I was a little bit like, man, they're just over screening this thing, you know? Word of mouth. So word of mouth is big, because you think about it, like this was something we'd always like talk to our investors about. It's like, okay, so 50,000 people see it, you know, you need millions of people. That's the thing that's daunting about a theatrical release. You need millions of people to go see that movie. I mean, like there's something like, I think they estimated for Jesus Revolution opening weekend, it's like $10 a ticket, so you got to do the math on that. So if the movie does 15 million, you know, or it's more now. I know, I haven't seen a $10 ticket in a long time. I went and saw one of these like Fathom events you guys all do, and it was like $18 for my ticket. And I was like, what in the world? But yeah, it varies. So I mean, like opening weekend of Jesus Revolution, give or take, it was, you know, over 1 million people went to see the movie. Probably 1.5 million people so far. Probably 4 or 5 million people have watched the film. So if you think about that, and probably more, you know, by the end of the release, that's a ton of people to mobilize in a world that's just fighting for attention everywhere. How do you mobilize that many people? And you got to get really clever. So word of mouth is a huge part of our campaign. We don't have as much money as Hollywood does, which they can kind of generate that word of mouth and that buzz by dropping $30 million in a week on every single place you watch television and movies. We don't have that, so we have to get scrappy, so you have time. So they worked that movie for a year, screenings, you know, grassroots events, meetings, kind of going around the country. You almost have to old-fashioned politic it everywhere. And then I think I do think they, in the last bit of the campaign, employed some pretty unique strategic social things like those Instagram and Facebook Lives, and we spent a lot of money on digital ads targeting our core audience. You know, we didn't have a lot of money to do TV ads, which is a big part of normal theatrical. We also did billboards, which is to me so fascinating. I've never, in any of the movies I've ever worked on, done billboards. And on this one, we spent some money to do some billboards in key places. And I guess in the world of just oversaturation, like we're back to old school, like right in front of you, you can't swipe this, you know, like it's right, like you're driving. So I would be interested to dig into that. Yep. Well, and that's a huge part, is who you cast in your movie. It's so important, you know, and it's not just name, because if we've all seen these big budget movies with huge name actors just bomb. and you're like, how did that Tom Hanks movie not work, or how did that movie not work? So I am a big believer, because where I operate in is mostly in this market and in the niche side of things, to get very strategic with who you cast. So if you look at Jesus Revolution, I think some very strategic casting. You got Kelsey Grammer, who's a staple person that people know, and is a very recognizable name, kind of one of the longest running television stars, characters in history, between Frasier and Cheers. Not only that, he had a great narrative. He's, for our market, he's a conservative guy. He's pretty well known as a conservative guy. He had a faith experience that he was very willing to talk about and actually liked to talk about. Then we had Jonathan Rumi, who's Jesus from The Chosen. Chosen is this viral thing, and he delivers. He's really good. He's a great actor. So I'd say it's so hard when something works to pinpoint what exactly was the reason it worked. It's so much easier to pinpoint what didn't work when it fails. Everybody knows when it fails. Well, I'll tell you why it failed. And also, this is kind of the true, and I've been a part of it. We've all been a part of it. There's this John F. Kennedy quote I love, and it says, "Success has 1,000 fathers, and failure is an orphan." And it's so true. Like, if we've all been a part of, I'm sure in some capacity, projects that worked, and then everybody takes credit. Like, there's a million people that were responsible for the Passion of the Christ working. And then when something fails, you're always like, I didn't really have that big of a role in it. So the truth is, films are very collaborative, and there's a lot of different characters that work on them. So I like film for that reason, because there's 20 people that can take credit for Jesus Revolution working, and I'm happy they do take the credit, because they've all done a great job. Yeah, I think it's different than a political campaign, because you kind of all win. Everyone looks good when something works. Yes.
So you were talking about like counterprogramming. So like Woodlawn, what was that? The counterprogramming?
Well, that might have been part of the problem on that one. With the weekend we came out on Woodlawn, I don't remember what we were counter-programming. I think our strategy was off a lot in the marketing of that film, particularly. A few of the things, and again, you can't ever go back, like, again, I'm doing my own thing. I'm telling you what didn't work. When there's a lot of things that didn't work. Timing is a huge part, and I think our timing was off on that film. One of the things we thought was, and this can be a misconception, I have a relevant topic. At that point in time, Ferguson was a huge issue in the country, that we were talking about racial issues. We thought, well, this is a great story of racial reconciliation in the gospel. Maybe this will be relevant. Sometimes you don't want to watch what you're watching on the news in theaters, because it's an escape. You want to watch something that's like gets you away from it. So we thought that was relevant, so maybe that would work. We didn't make the movie. We were actually in the middle of production when that all started happening. But we thought, this is good. This maybe will connect because of that. That was not, and I think in fact somewhat was a deterrent. The name of our title was another issue. You could make the argument that some of the Kendrick movies have had titles that weren't IP related or connected to something. But the truth is, they're so clever. If you look at like War Room, Prayer Room. Like you go into that war room, like that works. Their films are actually like the Kendricks are either the smartest guys or like and I think they just have this like direct connect with the Lord somehow, and they get everything, because you look back on some of the things they do throughout the process of their films, and Monday morning quarterback it and go, that was the most brilliant thing. Like I was telling Stephen last night, War Room is a great example. Very, very successful theatrical film for what they spent versus what it made. I mean, I remember War Room because it was such a cool thing. On the second weekend, actually was the #1 film in America. So it wasn't #1 film first weekend, was the #1 film the second weekend, and beat Straight Outta Compton on it. And I was like blown away. Like, this is incredible. One of the things that I think is very fascinating about their casting, they never cast, other than Kirk Cameron in Fireproof, they haven't really cast big name actors, and I can make the argument Kirk isn't that big of a name anymore, but but it was very smart casting. They cast Priscilla Shire, who, again, anybody in Hollywood would have been like, what in the world are they doing? Like, that's so stupid. And the same thing with Jesus Revolution, Jonathan Rumi. I bet we had executives scratching their head going, really, you think that's worth it? But if you look at it, and he claims they really didn't even think about this, and I think that's true. They just are very in tune with what the Lord is kind of wanting them to do on their films. Priscilla has a massive following, of women's groups and Bible stories and devotionals, and that kind of audience getting revved up about a project, it's just massive. So casting is a huge part of the process, and you don't always have to cast a huge name if you don't have a budget. I would say you got to get scrappy. I just did a movie with the small bones of for King and Country. That was the last movie I produced, a movie called Unsung Hero. We did not have a massive budget for that film. It was a low budget indie film, not attached to a studio, which is like very difficult to get cast interested in. So my thought on that was, man, we got to cast some people strategically in the story. I mean, the most strategic was it's the story of their family coming from Australia to the U.S. It's an amazing story that kind of focuses on their mom and family and motherhood. It's really sweet. So the band behind it is a brand for King and Country, a pretty sizable brand in the faith community. So Joel plays his dad in the film. That's strategic casting. He didn't cost me a lot because he was one of the producers. So that would be a strategic casting. Then we cast Candace Cameron Bure, who has a huge women's following, and she's big in the faith community. So again, she's not an A-list talent, but she has a big following. And she's a known actress, and she has a big following with the core market of our films. And then I cast a few other people that I really enjoyed. Lucas Black, who you might not know him by name, but when you see his face, you're like, oh, he was like, as a kid, he was a huge star. He was in a movie, a child breakout star in a movie called Swing Blade, and then he went on to do like 150 episodes of NCIS New Orleans. Was in the Fast and the Furious franchise of all things. He was actually the co-lead in Tokyo Drift. He got radically saved a couple years ago and really doesn't care too much about Hollywood anymore and just wants to do like movies about his faith. So he was a great cast in it. And so you got to get creative. I've known some filmmakers who were in my same budget range who did not kind of be strategic about who they cast in it. So they end up with actors who are good, who play the role well, but they don't have anything to kind of attach to it. I feel really bad because they get to a place where they're trying to market this film and go out and present and do PR and stuff, and just you don't have an angle. You got to have an angle on the talent you attach, even if it's not, a huge name. So I saw that hand first, and then I'll get to you. Sorry. Yes.
You talked about Samuel Goldwyn distribution.
Mm-hmm.
Can you touch more about that and how is it beneficial to us indie filmmakers?
Well, it's the only way your movie gets out, because that's the tough thing. None of us can we could start our own company. I've seen people have tried to do this, but not well. And if we're going the theatrical route, you can call up theaters and try to book your movie, but that's not going to go very far, and you're not going to get great placement. I don't know anybody at Amazon to call to try to get my movie in there, and oftentimes they don't really, especially I'll just keep it in the theatrical route because I don't have too much experience on the streamer side. You have to have somebody distribute your movie. You can try to self-distribute if you don't have a huge budget for the film. Like if you did a smaller project, maybe it cost $100,000. I know people that have been very clever about self-distributing a project. You're not going to get it in theaters, not many. So you might have to just kind of discount that. You might be able to sell directly to your customer, which I love that model, and I love to see it when it works. I think The Chosen is breaking in all sorts of molds and being more innovative than anybody in Hollywood. So I love to see people do that. I'm all for that. It's not been proven kind of on a mass scale to be very effective. So you have to work with these middlemen, which are the distributors. And there's a handful of guys that are really good in that. There's some that are not. I was talking to a filmmaker last night. He was a friend of mine. He had done a deal on a film a couple years ago that he made where he did a distribution deal, locked up the distribution, because typically a distribution deal will be from 15 to 25 years. Basically they have the exclusive right to monetize your film in all forms of media. Not usually these guys are domestic and they let you do foreign, but what they'll cover in that now is streaming, television, home entertainment, any form that you can monetize your film. So it's really locked up. You might own the IP, but you can't do anything with it for 15 years. So that company that he had signed with went bankrupt, and he got screwed. He lost all his money in the film. He's just waiting around in bankruptcy, proceedings to see if he can get anything out of it. So you do need to be wise about who you ultimately sign with, and ask around and look and see if they're just good people and that they're trusted. And there are not too many good people in Hollywood, but if at least they're trusted, they're big. So that is a danger, and that's why I always recommend good legal, that's a huge part of it. I have a lot of experience in that, but I would never trust myself to do a distribution deal. I'd always have a lawyer, be a part of it. But yeah, you have to have somebody to get your film out there, unless you're going to get real creative, which I love all the real creative ideas. So you have the next question, then I'll get you in the back. Yep.
Have you seen any, or can you speak to the process of marketing and return a dramatic film like I Can Only Imagine versus a comedic film like Mom's Night Out? Like the differences.
Comedy's hard. It depends on the marketplace. So there is a lot right now of, there was a lot, I love these, I don't pay a lot of attention to trends because I really believe like there are certain things to watch, but trends are just, I remember like a month before I Can Only Imagine came out, I saw a Variety article that said the musical biopic is dead. And then I was like, oh man, we might be in trouble. And then I Can Only Imagine came out, and then A Star Is Born came out, and then like the movie, like there was like 4 huge, Bohemian Rhapsody, yeah, there was all these giant musical things that came after that, and they all like smoked it. And I was like, interesting. And so in the last 6-7 months, I follow a lot of the different industry trades because I just like to understand what they're talking about and how it's working. A lot of talk has been on, the dramatic stuff isn't working in theaters. Films for an older demographic they don't go out to theaters anymore. It's dead. Maybe it will end up on like streamers or HBO. And so I try not to read that. Before Jesus Revolution, that was the prevailing thought in Hollywood for the last year long of the last 2 years of COVID thinking was these dramatic films don't work anymore. Like you need to be tentpole IP action, horror, but I just don't think that's true. I think great content rises to the surface and clever marketing, helps it. But I think great content does rise to the surface. So I believe there's a place for it. I in the faith world, like if this is faith related, inspirational related content, there hasn't been a lot of comedies that have done well. Even Mom's Night Out for us was kind of a somewhat disappointment. We thought that was going to go and do $20-30 million domestically. It did 10. But it ultimately was very profitable post-theatrical, and a lot of people really loved it. And I think there's a place for it. I just think someone's got to do it and do it well. And when they do, everyone will watch it. And then everyone will go, hey, comedy's the new thing. Let's all do that. It's like The Chosen, and like if you would have come to me and said like, hey, I want to do a biblical story on Jesus, and I would be like, I've seen all those. Like I was homeschooled Christian conservative. I've watched every version of Jesus film you can see, and I'm just tired of it. Maybe a little bit. Not tired of the Bible. I love the Bible, but just for me. But then Dallas does something really special with The Chosen, and it blows up, and everybody wants it, and now it's genius, and now let's all do biblical epics. So I don't follow the trends on it, but I would say historically, for the faith crowd, it seems to be those dramatic kind of, I would say, true life stories tend to do really well. And I think it's just because it get the idea of like testimony, and you've got to see this story, and this was a true story, and it changed someone's life, and that really resonates in the faith inspirational crowd more so. But not to say if you have comedy ideas, you should do it. There was one person that I'm going to get to you. Someone in the back. Yes.
Can you name the names of those middlemen you were talking about?
Oh yeah, I can name a few that they kind of come and go sometimes. Roadside Attractions is a great middleman. Fathom Events has been a very unique. I love Fathom. They've really championed a lot of those limited theatrical releases or those event cinema releases where you've seen like, in theaters 2 nights. That's them. But they've actually kind of changed their model now where they have like 7-day releases. Currently, the only downside from Fathom, unless somebody knows new information, is like I love that they now are doing these like full-on like week-long theatricals and stuff. But they've changed their model a tiny bit where they don't have an output deal. So when they do it, they're only a theatrical distributor. So you would have to basically parcel out who you do deals with. So you'd have to say, okay, for theatrical, I do it with Fathom, and maybe for home entertainment, I do it with Lionsgate or Sony or Universal, if you have those connections. So that's the only downside of Fathom, but the upside of Fathom is they make it very easy. There's not a lot of upfront pricing. It allows you to be in theaters for a limited time, so you're not worried about like having to support a long release in theaters with a lot of money. I think there was a movie that I found fascinating. I wish the industry was even talking more about. I have these friends. They probably have come here before. There's a company called Sight and Sound Theaters. Are you guys aware of those guys? Man, they did this movie that I thought was amazing called I Heard the Bells. And I watched it around Christmas. I think they were Fathom, right, Mark? Do you know if they were Fathom? They were Fathom. And they actually stayed in theaters for weeks and weeks and weeks, and they eked out like $5 million in theatrical box office during a time when all the movies were bombing. Like Babylon, I don't even think hit that high. And like they were killing it. No stars, no big names. They just knew how to work their audience really well. And they have a grassroots kind of audience, and they played on the Christmas thing, which a lot of people are afraid to touch Christmas because around the Christmas release is the big tentpole films from studios, and the media costs so much. So $1 does not go as far on Facebook around Christmas than it does in January when nobody wants to release things. A couple of those, would be Fathom. Samuel Goldwyn is one of those. Roadside Attractions does that. Some of the major studios are starting to do those services deals, like a Lionsgate or Universal. Sony Affirm does a lot of theatrical releases and deals, and PureFlix now plays in it because they have a strong subscription. Another buyer and one of these people you should all keep on your radar out there that I think is a growing resource is the Daily Wire. I mean, a lot of people don't realize like they have 1 million subscribers on their platform. That's a lot of people. And if you have content to get out there, and they're looking for content, they're looking for more affordable content, and they don't do parceled out, at least from the last time I've spoken to them. They don't do like, we'll buy your streaming rights and you do a theatrical. They want all in, so they buy you out. So if you come to them and you have a film, they buy out. You have another question? Yeah.
Yeah, outside of like IMDb Pro or just Google, how do you find more specific content information?
It's hard, man. That's like the business is a business of relationships. So there are, Christian companies that have I think these companies get overwhelmed with how many people probably come to them, so they like to do business with fewer people. Even I don't know too many people in a diverse amount of studios. I know a few. So there are certain companies that have done films. So if you go to those people, like WTA, Working Title Agency, is a company out there in Franklin that's done a lot of different kinds of theatrical releases and film releases. They facilitate relationships with a couple of those. I think it's mostly relationships. You go to producers that have produced films for those studios. They have relationships. The other way that I don't have a ton of experience with, but I have friends that have had a lot of success, is through agencies. So sometimes, in Hollywood, there are like 4 or 5 major representation agencies. Now, they don't really give too much time to Christians or faith content. They might now, since there's some success. But I've had friends that have gone to agencies like United Artists or UTA or WME. These are names, and that you give them the film, and they go to the different people and they sell to them. So that's another way. But it is the tricky part. That's the strategic part. Yes, and then you have.
I have 2 more questions.
Yes, only 2.
Just kidding, 1.
Yeah.
So, what was that thing you were saying about how you had a lot of trouble with the Woodlawn title? Can you explain that a little more?
If you think about, I love studying companies and what works. Sometimes when you have I can only imagine was the name of a song, 2 songs that were very popular, probably more. So that meant something to an audience. Like when they heard that, that's interesting. I think I know that. What is that? What's going on there? The phrase "I can only imagine" is a phrase we use a lot. People remember that. It sticks with them. And I remember reading about the Chinese eBay, which is a company called Alibaba. And I remember the founder, which is funny. I don't even know how he came up with it, but the founder was like, "I got so much goodwill from this company out in the marketplace because people just remembered the name." It's a funny because we all know Alibaba and the 40 Thieves or whatever. So, Woodlawn. What do you think about when you if you didn't know the film, when you hear that? What does that sound like? Yeah. Someone said a lawn care company once to me. You just don't. It doesn't mean something, so it doesn't stick. So that's something just to think about when you're naming your product. It didn't mean anything to anybody. It meant something to some people in Alabama. Not a big. Even if all of Alabama showed up, we would have had a problem. Being successful. Which I think is the only people that showed up. So that's a part of your strategy for sure. And you had a question, yes?
Yeah. So you talked about
Yes,
How did you get into those churches?
it's a great question.
And did you do the same thing? I know October Baby, y'all had like a church package or something?
Yep. So that's part of that grassroots marketing, and there's teams that really specialize in that. But the problem over the last couple of years is that they've been bombarded a lot with content, because as the faith market has grown, more films have come out. In the beginning it was very easy, I feel like, because it was like when Stephen and Alex were kind of creating this stuff early on, there wasn't other Christian films. It was like, how is a Christian film in Blockbuster? That's a huge deal. So I think pastors saw this as like, oh, this is neat. And kind of like the way of Christian music, I think Christian film now is growing, and there are more content creators, and so there's more people coming to them. So I think they actually have gotten a little overloaded with it. So it was easier early on to get into churches, do screenings and such. Now it's a little bit more difficult. I can only imagine, we did some church screening strategy, but we didn't do it nearly like we did on Jesus Revolution. We did more in-market screenings where you actually rent a theater, have an email list, recruit people in, say, hey, do you want to watch a free movie? And there's all these like companies that have email lists, and those lists are a little like debated if the people that are showing up are just purely consumers or are they decision makers and stuff. But we did that on I Can Only Imagine, and I would say we went more deep with Christian radio and then screening and PR stuff than we did with churches. Where on Jesus Revolution, the story itself and the character we told it around kind of justified more of a strategy like that, and it also made it easier, because we're calling up going, this is the Greg Laurie film, and Greg Laurie is a very well-respected pastor. In some ways, people like Greg Laurie is not as famous as Joel Osteen or maybe even Stephen Furtick or some of these guys that have a bigger presence, but he is a pastor's pastor. So most pastors know who he is. Most pastors really respect what he has to say. And because of that, it was not very hard to knock on doors and say, we want to tell the story of Greg Laurie, of Calvary Chapel. I mean, it's literally a story about pastors. The three main characters are pastors. So that one lent itself a lot more to a strategy. And that's why you have to, there's not a one-size-fits-all for each film. You really got to think about who is the audience. That's a big part of I always challenge filmmakers, who is your audience? I had this marketer, Chris, remember her? She would always say, who are the first, I think, 10 to 20 people to buy tickets to your movie? Who are the first people going to the box office and buying these tickets? Focus on them. And for us, we knew that the faith, especially with Jesus Revolution, this was going to be a church-going, faithful audience. And then hopefully after that, you would branch out more into other audiences, and it would be more evangelistic, and you get people that wouldn't otherwise come. So for that one, lent itself much more to a church strategy. There are a lot of what we call ministry partners. There are marketers who specifically work in denominations. There are people that work in predominantly African-American churches. There are people that work in charismatic churches. There are people that are the Southern Baptist guy. I mean, there really is. That's what he does. You hire him because you want the SBC, and he knows how to get into the SBC and go to the different meetings, and he knows the different people in charge, and you get that, and you hire that company, and you say, get me there, get me to show. And there's a lot, over the years, it's gotten more organized. So now these organizations have kind of a system for how they deal with it. So they have events, and they say, okay, you can sponsor the event, and you can play your trailer here, and you have an opportunity to get in front of people, and then you just grassroots it, So I've been to countless SBC meetings. Yeah, I've been to I've gone in one trip from SBC to the Assemblies of God. I don't tell them that I've been jumping back and forth, but but it is funny. Film does have the ability to kind of be cross-denominational, which is really cool, and that's what I really love about it. You have people watching Jesus Revolution and ranting about it that are super conservative on the Southern Baptist side, and then super charismatic and on this side. So it's cool that film oftentimes has the ability to kind of cut through that and reach people. So there is a whole network and teams out there, people that specialize in that. There's ways to create resources for people to go further. So every movie I've ever worked on, we have curriculum that we've developed that if you are interested, you can kind of bring your small groups through leading up to the release of the film and use it as a resource for people. October Baby was an emphasis on life. I think Jesus Revolution is probably going to be an emphasis on evangelism. Again, this is what is the movie about? Mom's Night Out, we had more of a family motherhood emphasis. Woodlawn, we had resources for that. So you just kind of look at the product and go, how do I help with that? And part of the resources for Woodlawn was Tony Evans did a whole Bible study with it, and that was really great. And so you just got to think about your film, and what are we trying to communicate? What is the audience, and how is that relevant to the church, and how can we serve the church with this product? Ultimately, it's a movie, but we rely on our core audience, which is the church, to kind of utilize these tools. And again, that's a whole discussion about what kinds of films do you make. I have friends that don't want to make films that are as evangelical or as to the core audience, and that's fine. God has called us to do all sorts of things. I remember someone saying about the Kendrick films that they're for the kind of for the choir, and the choir needs a lot of work. So there's always and that's true, and I don't think they're apologetic about that. John and Andy Erwin, their goal was to kind of try to be more evangelistic in their approach, to go out and make these movies that seem like big movies that normal movie-going audience would just come to. I would still say the core of their base is the faithful kind of, but the idea was, let's make movies that are so entertaining that the core can get behind and utilize and invite people that are not the faithful in, and that not be embarrassed. That's an angle, and that's a different approach. And God has called us all to different approaches. Barry.
As far as the theatrical release, the number of theaters that
Yes.
film will go into the first week, what are the determining factors of that?
Yeah.
And I know I've heard also if it does well, then it expands to other
Yep.
theaters. How does that work?
So yeah, good question. The first question is, there's a couple things you want to look at. So, of course, we all want to be as broad as possible, right? We want to be in 4,000 theaters, or I don't even know how many, but usually it's a wide release is considered what, Mark? Is it anything above 1,300 or 1,000? About 1,000 screens would be considered a wide release. Most big tentpole movies are anywhere from 2,500 to 3,500 screens. I think Jesus Revolution came out on close to 2,500 screens, which is incredible. The danger of, you have to look at your strategy. There are some, there's a couple things that the industry looks at as a metric of it working. There's something called a per screen average. So they look and they say, okay, across all your screens, how much business did you do over the weekend in a particular screen? And if that number's low, that's not good. And so if you're really spread wide, there's this thing hanging out there that you have to spend I think it's $10,000 per market to really have a successful film. Or it might be even screen. I don't remember. Is it per theater? 10,000 per theater? It's a lot. We don't usually have that much, but you have to just make it effective to get that many people out. So if you think the wider you go, the more you have to spend to support that. And the narrative opening weekend is not good, even if your box office is higher, if your per screen average is low. Because what will end up happening is the theaters will drop you. So you want to expand, you don't want to retract. So if you come out in too many screens, your per screen average is low, your next weekend you're going to lose a ton of screens. And you're going to have a hard time adding screens. Because the theaters, you have to have the empathy to the theater owners. They're going, man, this is not generating a lot of people coming out to watch this movie. They're not in the movie business, they're in the popcorn business. So they really are, because they break even on movies, and that maybe helps keep their facility on, but they don't make a profit on that. They make a profit. They're in the business of getting people into that theater to buy popcorn and the snacks and all the other things. So they might like your film, but they can't justify a screen. So buyers who do this, for the theater chains, will look and say, okay, this film is doing no business in this theater, throw it out. So that's part of what's also advantageous about being part of a bigger studio is they have more pull. So you come out with Lionsgate and you go, hey, put these guys in 2,400 theaters. I know you don't think they're gonna be huge, but do it because I'm coming down the pike with John Wick, and you're gonna want to have John Wick in your movie theaters. So they can bully you. They can bully you. Yes.
So did you guys market a year, but I'm assuming you market a year before you went into theater?
That's right.
That
It does help you. The more time you have, the more typical Hollywood thinking is, let's just they'll do an audience test screen. If it screens well, that determines their strategy. And then honestly 3 months out from the movie coming out, they start marketing, and 3 weeks out from that, So 3 months out, they start marketing. 3 weeks out from that, they just dump so much money into the marketplace. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, they move on. They don't do the grassroots thing very often. Like it's just too time consuming. It doesn't work for them. So they just pour lighter fluid on it and see if it catches. And if it doesn't, who cares? They move on. And that's how it goes. Because they have like portfolio thinking, which is like the idea of like, we're going to release 10 movies and we'll hope 3 of them work. So back to that, hopefully I answered your question on that screen count. I've been a part of projects that started with less screens because we wanted a narrative. It's all about having a narrative that you can kind of sell. Opening weekend that, hey, we were on 800 screens and we had this high per screen average. And then that resonates with people and they expand.
And other theaters pick it up. How
Yep.
does that work?
So that a lot of times that's also an important part of who your distributor is, how good they are with exhibitor relations. So like I loved Roadside because I felt like Roadside was always really good at holding screens, so not losing them, and adding. So Jesus Revolution has consistently been adding. I mean, it's crazy how still, we're 3 weeks in, I think, how wide still, might be almost 4, how wide it has stayed. And that's due to Lionsgate, doing a good job. It's also because the exhibitors are paying attention to what the movie's doing. And exhibitor relations, which exhibitor means theaters, basically. There are 3 or 4 major theater chains, and there's a lot of independents. You don't want to ever look over those in a theatrical strategy. You want to really like love on those people and develop a relationship because they will champion you. So yeah, if you want to have a narrative if you think your movie has a chance of growing in the word of mouth, but you don't have a ton of money, and you really want to, there's something called a limited release strategy, which is you like literally these films will open in 5 theaters, and they'll do like 100,000 per screen average, in these 5 theaters, and they'll use that narrative to go to the trades and go, this movie's blowing up, and it's only on 5 screens. But they'll do, and we did it. We did it on October Baby. We actually did a limited release before we went to the wide release, and we just saturated Birmingham, Alabama, because that's where we were from. We had connections and made sure everybody in that city came out to see the movie, and then went back and went, look at our per screen average, So it's a strategy. A lot of times oftentimes it's manufactured, but yeah, it just helps you kind of expand.
So the marketing that hit me for Jesus Revolution was seeing a movie poster.
Yep.
On Instagram. But what really, I knew I wanted to see the movie because it just looked cool.
Yeah.
But what really got me was my pastor at Wednesday night prayer. We were speaking about it. He's like, there's all these pockets of revival happening.
Yep.
And Asbury happening, and we have this movie. I really feel like we're called. Let's
Yeah.
do this movie. So I called all my girlfriends. I'm like, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's make it a group and let's make it an outing. I'm curious, being in the faith-based film industry, if you see what your thoughts are.
Yep.
If you think God was giving you guys a push
Yep.
at that time. I'd love to hear your feedback. But then also, has something like that ever happened before with any other films that you've
Yeah.
produced?
So you have to hire the revival guy. No, I'm just kidding. Someone actually called me and were like, how much did it cost to start that revival? I was like, did not happen. No, I mean, that's what's so amazing about God's timing. And that's what you can't, timing's everything. I talked a little bit about in my talk the other day. It's like, I look back on some of these films that worked versus the ones that didn't, and we didn't do much differently. It's just that God chose to bless one, didn't choose to bless the other like that. And not to say that we didn't learn and he wasn't blessing that, in that, I'm not a prosperity guy that it has to work or the Lord's hand wasn't on it. God has reasons for all these things that are beyond us. The gift from on high for that movie was, man, we couldn't have planned that. How would we have planned that? We shot the movie in the middle of 2020, in the pandemic era. There was no talking of revival. Like when we would talk about revival, I remember being in a marketing breakout session where we're like, hey, the Gen Z generation doesn't really get revival. I'm not sure, I don't know if we should call it Jesus Revolution, because I feel like that's just, they don't understand. It's kind of weird when they say that. Seriously, we had a lot of pushback to the title of the movie being called Jesus Revolution. And there was a lot of don't call it revival, call it a movement. Why don't we go towards movement? I think they'll understand movements and because of all these different movements that are out there. And we're like, I don't know, man. You can go blue in the face on marketing stuff. We didn't have that. Just what a gift on that. And I just think I think God's moving. I think we definitely did have this thought of this is really neat because if you study revival, it comes in 50-year increments, and this is coming out on the time period that is 50 years. And that was something we would talk about and be like, maybe this can happen. Our hopes was like, man, maybe this will inspire. What's so cool is it happened before we even came out. Like it started popping up, and that was a huge, huge gift for the film. But I look at it and go, hey, this was God's timing. God, nothing's wasted on the Lord. Even a bunch of idiots making a movie. You know, it's just true. Like God uses the foolish to shame the wise, and like everybody involved in Jesus Revolution was foolish. And like truthfully, we're not that smart and strategic. I think that's what's big about having that posture of humility throughout the whole process of making these films and not getting too ahead of yourself. Because we actually got really ahead of ourselves with the narrative on Woodlawn. We were, if you watch that movie, there's a whole revival theme to it, and it's about a revival breaking out. And we were for sure hoping like, oh man, if we do this movie, maybe revivals will start popping up on college campuses and football. Didn't happen. God didn't choose it. But part of that, I feel like, was because we were in the will of God with it. We were like getting ahead of it, and it was about us trying to get it out there. Again, I really believe in the movie. I think it has a message that's really powerful, and I love that film. But you just have to be careful not to get ahead of God in these things. So by the time we did Jesus Revolution, I feel like we came into it very humbly again. We're like, you know what? This is an important story. We've got to tell it. We felt called to do it. There was a lot of spiritual presence on the film between the people making it that were very unified, the different actors that came in that were very reverent, like in Kelsey Grammer and Jonathan Rumi. Greg was there every day of filming and just trying to love on that. We started every day in prayer. There was a lot of prayer meetings that weren't planned and moments that were just really special. And I think we're a part of something that God's doing. I don't think God's doing it so our film is successful. I think it just happened to be that we were in the will of God in making it. So yeah, I don't know who went first, so I'm just going to go here.
So with a big project like that, obviously you guys are blessed making like a good profit on that.
Yeah.
I'm sure some people are in it just for the money. Other people are like,
yeah,
it's a good evangelization tool. When you make a big profit like that, what are the key leaders of the project? What is their goal with that money?
Yeah.
And yeah, what do you do when you're
It's a great question. It's a great question because there is a monetary aspect, which always complicates things. I did a documentary in 2020 called Jesus Music, which is about the history of contemporary Christian music. And I kind of deep dived on that because I thought it was so fascinating. I'd always worked in faith film, so I thought this is an interesting study, and there was a lot of comparisons. And that question of like, typically in art, there is this like tension between like, are they in it for the money or are they in it for the art, right? That's the secular kind of struggle, right? And if you look at like the history of different musicians and bands or movies or things, there's always this tension of like, oh, these guys are just money hounds. And on this side, it's like, oh, these creative yahoos don't know how to make a business work, And there's always that tension in the secular. And in the faith side of things, it's like a triple whammy, like, because you have commerce, art, and faith. So that is, I feel like, a very complicated situation. And I don't know if everybody's in it for the right reasons. I think a lot of people start for the right reasons and get corrupted or influenced. That was one of the things I talked a little bit about yesterday. It's just that I feel like you have to be very careful getting into this because it has all those things that are the evil in our heart craves, fame, money, beauty, pride, all these things. Like we're just not meant for those. Like we're not meant to be famous. We're not meant to be celebrated like that, and there's only one that's meant to be celebrated like that. And unfortunately, like we'll experience those in some capacity throughout this process, and it will affect different people very differently. So I think that's a big part of why you have to be humble. That's why you got to have mentors in your life, and I think you have to know why you're getting into this. And so when a movie does profitable, I mean, our speech always kind of with Erwin Brothers and Kingdom was, man, the idea of if it is profitable, it is sustainable and it is scalable. So the idea was like, if we can make money on this, we can do more of this and we can go broader and we can get more people into it. So that was always our heart in it. I always tell people, if you're chasing money, you are going to go in circles and you're probably actually not going to create something very meaningful. It's a terrible motivator, for anything. But I don't think there's anything wrong with a product working and being successful. The Kendricks have been very successful. The Erwins have been very successful. And I think it's just like any business thing. You are going to be responsible to the Lord for how you steward, So I think it's a good sign, though, when something is profitable. I think there's a lot of Bible verses that talk about profit and stewarding that. As long as you're not being run by that. If your possessions own you and you don't own your possessions, then you're going to be getting into trouble. So I think that's such a personal thing. It's hard to. I don't know if I have a blanket answer to that, other than there will always be a tension of that, and I think that is a very personal to each person in the process. My hope would be, hey man, for me, I want to be successful at this so that other people have the opportunity to do it, so more stories like this get out there. We are far less successful currently than Hollywood is at making money doing these films. And Hollywood and a lot of businesses support what works. And they might get idealistic for a minute, but at the end of the day, these are publicly traded companies that need to show a profit. And so if Jesus Revolution makes a profit, I guarantee you, as great as the people of Lionsgate are, they're not in it ideologically. They are in a business. They're a publicly traded company. They're in it to please their shareholders. And that's what that's what they were built for. So if Jesus Revolution is highly successful and they get questions on that, I don't think they're out there defending the faith. They're going, this is a marketplace. We serve underserved marketplaces. And this is a market that wants content like this. So we will support it. And that is, in my opinion, being wise as serpents and innocent as doves. And that is part of how I think we have to approach businesses. And we should be successful. I think I would love to see a lot more successful films out there that are faith-based and companies, because that's more opportunity for people to work and more opportunity for this content to get out there and change lives. So that's my answer to that. Hopefully that's good. One more. Okay, yeah.
So I just want to be clear in order. So you guys
Yes.
shot it first, and then completed it, and then you pitched it to a distribution?
Yeah. So the order of things is always a good question. It's different for every project, and one of the things I do think you need to start with the end in mind. Like, I think far too many people, including myself at times, you get very idealistic about art. Everyone's gonna love this. You have to really think deeply about, what am I creating, and am I ready to take that step? I think sometimes in this world, I feel like, and I include myself in it, we're very eager to create and get out there. But we should ask ourselves, am I ready? What level am I ready for? That was kind of what I talked about yesterday, which is this idea of gaining skill over time and honing your craft. And because you don't have, unfortunately in this space, if you, a lot of the business side kind of looks to your last thing. So, if you have a failure or something doesn't work, they might not be as inclined to invest or to distribute or so you have to really be cautious about that because you don't have a lot of swings at bat, So you want to be mindful of that. So I always encourage people to really start with the end in mind, that's how you judge the budget, that's how you judge, but the indie model of filmmaking, which is where a lot of us have to start, is you've got to be kind of the overseer of it from concept to market, and it's going to look differently, but a lot of people produce the film, get it to a screenable kind of place, and then they go to the buyers and the distributors, and they say, look at this, is this something you would want to do? So, yeah, of course. I think that's all I have for time. Thanks, guys. Good meeting you.